I want to preface this really fast and let you know that I know this person. I know a lot of people in the video game industry. And I've known Andy for, I don't know, a decade or so. He has been with Kind of Funny for a good while. Kind of Funny, once again, as a background, was started by Greg Miller and Tim Geddes and Colin Moriarty as a place to go for them after they were quit/fired IGN about a decade ago. And Andy was hired from Rooster Teeth several years ago, and he's become a host. Now, I think Andy is a talented dude, but he lives in San Francisco. He lived in Austin, and he's surrounded himself with the echo chamber, right? And I think it's really important before we actually get into this to kind of preference who Kind of Funny is as a brand. And this was on November 5th, Election Day. I mentioned Greg Miller, and Greg Miller had put this tweet out. Says it's Election Day. I don't want to talk to undecided, or I'll let Greg say it for himself.
But like, you've had people tell you, don't tell me how to vote or whatever. And I've seen those comments obviously as well or whatever. I think the biggest thing, especially for this podcast and the conversation we're trying to have here, that I'm trying to lead here, I should say, more than we're trying to have, is that I'm not telling you who to vote for. I'm asking you to vote for Kamala Harris. Like, you can do whatever you want. And again, if you feel like you need to sit this out and that you don't want to be a part of this and you can't vote because of a single issue, I'm not going to tell you to vote for it. I'm going to ask you to vote for her and get over that, because I think this is race is too important, that there is too much on the line.
So that's Greg. This is Andy. Okay. Andy came out, and he's had a lot of things to say about DEI and diversity, equity, inclusion, and in his words, angry grift tubers. And he put this out yesterday, and there's a lot of reception to this. So I wanted to kind of play this, and naturally he's getting the seal claps from everybody in his sphere. But go listen to this, and I feel like there's a lot of overgeneralizations along the way here. So let's go ahead and play this.
You fucking need DEI, because you wouldn't have jobs if DEI didn't exist to complain about. You wouldn't be making money on YouTube if DEI didn't exist. So you're really the ones that need it. Unless the game has only white dudes. If you have a woman, she better be fucking hot.
Yeah.
Get an ugly woman out of my game. That lady better be super smoking hot. Yep. That's the way they think, right? Back in the day, game development studios were primarily white dudes. And they didn't really think about diversity. And that's one thing, right? It was a lot rarer to find non-white dudes in game development. And as that changes, and as college and learning and all that stuff kind of becomes more ubiquitous and more available for everybody, more and more people from different walks of life want to get into game development.
Yeah.
And then what happens then?
They're making the characters the people that they know, the things that they see.
And it's just
like the white people do.
just like you put yourself into stories, right?
Yeah.
And I talked about that with Dragon Age Veilguard, how the game director, Corinne Bush, she's a trans woman. And sometimes in games, you just put in your own sort of experiences. And that's so natural to happen.
That's what art is.
It's nothing that's supposed to offend anybody. It's supposed to be, hey, fucking walk around and look around. The world has everybody. Your game's having it. Shouldn't stop you from playing it.
Okay. So there was this statement, and I think, Andy, in his mind, I'm just going to speak for him, because I think he thinks that he's 100% hit the nail, the head of the nail, and he smacked that son of a bitch down. And that was an intense own of the chuds along the way. The problem is that he left a lot of really, nuance out of the conversation. Now, to be clear, as a professional podcaster would, I have invited Andy on the show because I do think it's worth having a conversation about this. Now, will he come on the show? Probably not. Will he respond to me? Probably not. But I do want to offer that opportunity, because I do think having a conversation about this is actually very important. And I think that it's people can hear his perspective, and he can hear someone else's perspective that isn't in his immense echo chamber, right? So Mally, just your overall thoughts there first and foremost. So do you have any thoughts about what Andy said along the way about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how, more or less, listen, you white guys, they're the problem. You're not thinking about DEI and diversity along the way.
Yeah. Wow. So 2 things that I have to say is, one, that he kind of double backed on himself there. Did anybody catch that? Or maybe I misheard him. Correct me if I'm wrong. But he said, well, these things are out in the world and just get used to it. And there's nothing wrong with pulling from personal experience. In fact, it's very common when you take your own personal experience and put it into the game. It would be like your art, whatever. It makes sense. And then, like 2 seconds prior, he was saying how it's so wrong that white dudes are the ones making games and using all that they know to make games. Well, it's almost like you're only using all that you know, which is your DEI bullshit, to make your games, which is why no one likes them. And then, yeah, my second thing I was going to say is more of just like a quip and also a realization. There's a reason Rooster Teeth shut down.
Listen, as somebody who was in the belly of the beast of Rooster Teeth when Rooster Teeth was going through its transition to from male to female, I'll tell you this: I witnessed it firsthand, and that company went from producing some badass stuff to just being a pussification and a parody of itself.
Yeah.
But the response to this has been, obviously there's been a lot of like, you go, Andy, right? From his echo chamber. Then from people outside of the echo chamber, they're kind of laying it down with that's right, facts and data. This one from Adrian over on X saying, retitle this to the perpetual lie about DEI. Games have always been diverse. Even pre-2014, we had a black protagonist lead in one of gaming's biggest franchises, lesbian protagonists and other titles, and player choice of sexuality in multiple AAA RPGs. The issue isn't diversity. It's forced diversity. It's franchises being co-opted by agendas. It's using games as vehicles for propaganda. Let's end the narrative. Just stop along the way. He mentioned Dragon Age Veilguard. At the end of the day, like there was a report that it's sold over 1 million copies. Awesome. Congratulations. Is that going to reach its 10 million goal or its 5 million goal? No way. There's no way it's 20% of its goal. And it's not going to get there. But the response continues here from Shagsworth, who's had on the show. He says, I can appreciate the passion, but this completely ignores the real criticism of that, quote, angry grift tubers have. You either aren't listening or you've been getting your info secondhand. Gamers enjoy escapism. Not everything needs to be a reflection of the real world. We engage with fantasy worlds to escape the real world. Bad storytelling has plagued both Hollywood and games for the past several years, and it's because we place identity at the center of marketing and narratives, all while telling the audience that, quote, whiteness needs to be a thing of the past. Not a great formula when you talk down to the majority of your player base.
Facts.
Great stuff, Shags, right there. Blabs, your thoughts on this before we get on to some other responses over on X?
I don't know. See, here's the thing. On one hand, some people straight up do talk solely about DEI in video games, and that's it, and only that. And they don't highlight the awesome video games that are out there, and they don't have fun on their channels and things like that. And so I think that one point at the very beginning actually does apply to some people, but I agree with Shagsworth that there is still a huge criticism there.
I think that there are people who talk about DEI as a that is one of their things, or specifically forced diversity when it comes to it, and they talk about it because they are passionate about games, right? And that's natural. I think that's one of the things that's why we talk about it, because we want the games industry to be successful. And when you look, the reality is that Dragon Age Veilguard is not going to be successful. It's going to underperform. And why do you think that is? Because they see clips online that don't relate to the vast majority of the audience. They don't want to be dressed down for using pronouns for 2 minutes, or pulling a barv along the way, doing 10 push-ups because you misgender somebody, or having to put, or having the options to think about top surgery scars in a fantasy game, right? Like, that's what we're dealing with here. And it's really insane when you break it down and you say, okay, yeah. But it really goes back to, who's the game director? Well, somebody who in 2020 got really messed up and decided they want to be a woman, a white male, by the way. Just want to point that out there. Same white male that you're talking about. But we can continue. Let's talk about a black male. Mugen Lord came in, said game developer studios, especially console gaming, weren't primarily white dudes. The Japanese dominated most of the console gaming market back until the early to mid 2000s. The West had become a dominant force. What the hell is Andy talking about? And that's the thing. This whole gaming market originated in Japan, which, unless if you're going to throw all the Asian people in as white people along the way, your entire argument is flawed. The idea that it's only white dudes along the way. No, it's not. The white dudes came later along the way, as it was dominated in the 80s by Asians. It says, it's not about whether or not a chick is hot in a video game. It's people coming into the space and trying to force their ideology onto a culture that has always been that way since before they came into the space. And there it is, to the idea of coming in and pushing everybody out because it needs to be your way. And this is across industries along the way. There's enough room for everybody in this space. The gaming community has always been welcoming. These people have come in and these people could have come in and had their own space. If people want to play inclusive games, then go ahead and make those games for that space. But that's not what they're doing. They're invading other spaces and forcing traditional IPs to adopt their ideologies into the games. Stop fucking with Final Fantasy, Halo, Street Fighter, Tekken, Arkham games, Saints Row, Resident Evil, and the list goes on. That's all we're asking. And I think he nails it right there, right? If you want to make your own IPs, make your IPs and let them work along the way. So, yeah, it's I think that's the most interesting thing about this is I think this really speaks to the disconnect. And I've talked about the disconnect between the games media and the games industry, and specifically the customers all the time. But once again, Andy is a guy who lives in San Francisco. He lived in Austin, which is like San Francisco, Texas, right? Before then. And he's worked for extremely liberal companies in an extremely liberal industry. So naturally, his entire worldview, and you see this along the way with a lot of folks over the last week or so. I try to put myself in their shoes, and Mally, maybe you can speak more to this, but these people, their entire worldview has been shattered. They don't understand why people would vote or think differently than them. And I think Andy and Greg and most of the people, probably all the people are kind of funny, and most people in the video game industry have had their worldview shattered along the way, and they don't know how to respond to it. So they're acting irrationally, and they're acting emotionally, and they're saying, I'm not going to see you at Christmas, friend who voted for Trump, or I'm going to cut you off because I chose compassion over whatever. Yeah. I don't know, Mally, am I off on that, or?
No, I feel like you nailed it on the head. I mean, the number of people just in my personal life that I knew that said that they wanted to vote for Kamala out of spite. Out of spite. Like, spite voting is a very real thing. I had multiple friends who registered for the first time to vote this year, which I was so proud of them. Like, regardless of what they voted for, that's a beautiful thing that they've decided to step up and take that control into their, that decision into their hands and their lives, welcome it in. A lot of them had sworn off doing it at all until this, so that's great. But then you have those spite voters out there who registered to vote out of the sake of proving a point. They have forgotten what the intention of voting is about, that it's about them and their well-being and not about anybody else or proving a point or getting a stick in. You know who these people are. They are children who never grew up, right? You don't give the kid the candy they're begging for. What do? They scream and cry. And if it's time to go home from the playground and they don't want to leave, they scream and cry. If they're not getting what they want, then they're just going to throw a temper tantrum about it. And it's really sad. And it's what I've been saying in a lot of my videos recently. I know you guys know that I make a lot of these like stir the pot videos, and I have for the last several years, all through the Biden administration. I did, right? And now we're finally at a point where we can turn the page and I don't have to be screaming like that anymore. But what I am going to be screaming for the next 4 years until something's done about it is the mental illness issue in this country. I use mentally ill as an insult a lot, but I mean it as a genuine definition for what is going on. That is the bigger and more important statement. Yeah. If you're hurt by me calling you mentally ill, big deal. It's also a fact. A majority of the people right now, all of the people that you, Craig, were saying have their whole worlds shattered, or the spite voters. It's like, You are mentally ill. You don't know what's going on. You're refusing to accept even the idea of somebody being different from you. Do you know the amount of conversations I've had with the most lefty leftists? And I can keep my composure. I accepted it 4 years ago when we didn't win. So why is it now that we're not allowed to be friends or family and we're not allowed to talk to each other anymore because your guy didn't win? We do this every 4 years, but this time it changes the course of the future. It's because they're children. Unfortunately, it's my generation. It makes me embarrassed because I hear so many people say Gen Z is so woke. No, we're not, and I'm here. Okay, and I represent a lot of people, a lot of kids my age out there that don't feel this way. And a lot of my generation, not all, but I'd say a competing half do. And we need to fix them and we need to guide them towards getting help, towards therapy. Okay, I bring back mental asylums, maybe reform them a little so they're not as abusive, but yes, bring back mental asylums. Give these people an option that isn't just cutting off their body parts and spitefully voting against their family, because that's not the answer that's going to fix them. Even if they end up staying like this, at least they could get some therapy to become more tolerant or more manageable. But it's the eruption that is so unacceptable. That's why these people need to, I've been saying it for years, but a civil divorce. They're starting to wish it on themselves now. They're starting to say, oh, we should move to blue states. Well, first of all, there's no blue states, but move to a blue city. I agree. Vote in the people, like Rachel Ziegler was saying. Use those local governments, right? Make the change that you think that you can make. That is the beautiful path that you should choose. Might not go the way you think it does because there's not as many of you as you think there are, but I encourage you to try nonetheless. That's my thought.
Love it. No, I appreciate it. I appreciate it. Well, there's more. As Quarter Black Garrett came in and kind of pointed out the hypocrisy here once again of the of Andy talking about the angry grift tubers along the way, and he said, "You're making money on X or whatever platform your show's on, expressing your opinion on it, so you're grifting." To which Andy responded with, "I don't have monetization on. I need less reason to interact with people like y'all." Oh, there you go right there. It says, "Makes no money doing the shows you're doing." That's right. And then he says, "I get paid to do these shows. It's a clip. I'm responding to a question about Concord and how it failed because it was a $40 game in a free-to-play world, not because it was woke." And this guy's right. He says Helldivers was a $40 game in a free-to-play world. So it's like pointed out along the way. But there was also a back and forth between Marty O'Donnell, who once again is the composer of the Halo theme and worked on many of the early Halo games, who we will have on the show December 6th, by the way. Make sure you guys mark that on your calendar, December 6th, Marty O'Donnell on the show. And he responded to Andy with this. Says, "I wish folks like Andy actually make a game at some point in their lives. Making a living spewing nonsense is a sad consequence of today's media. By the way, I don't think they know the definition of the word grifter." Now, Andy saw this as an opportunity to pounce. And he says, "Hey, Marty, former big fan of yours. You aren't a grifter because you were likely always a shitty dude. I'm talking about people who weren't making a career in games media, simply talking about games. So they decided to dive deep into making content for insecure, racist, homophobic, transphobic people in order to make money. I had 3 years in game development here." Now, I'm going to put a pin in that for just a second. And here's why this argument here doesn't work for me in particular. It's because I've been doing this better and longer than all of them. I'm one of the OGs in this space. I've literally had billions of views of my content. I've launched 3 successful brands. I've developed video games. I've done conventions. So every argument that they can throw at me in particular about being an angry grift tuber and talking about these things that they don't want us talking about, I can just shove right back in their face because I've been doing it bigger and longer. I am the enemy to them because I'm the one who's done everything that they want to do along the way and seen success literally at every level. So, they can't throw this shit back in my face. But we'll continue here with this. Marty came back, says, "Nice work, Andy, starting off by calling me a shitty dude. Here's an offer. Let's meet face to face and you can say that to me directly. I believe social media has not been good for your soul. If you actually made a game and I wasn't aware, I apologize." And this is where Andy immediately goes, "Trumpers resorting to violence," right? That's what he took out of that right there. says, I call you shitty to your face and you'd punch me or some shit, but that wouldn't make you less shitty. Diversity shouldn't be offensive or something to whine about. All it is some random dev saying, I'm going to make this NPC a gay black dude because it reminds me of a friend of mine. Then these awful YouTubers cry. They're forcing this gay black man into a story. By the way, it's important right here. Something that's actually really important here. Are they forcing a gay black man into a samurai story, perhaps? Maybe an Assassin's Creed game that takes place in feudal Japan where there were no gay black samurais? I'm just throwing it out there.
Maybe.
It's so unproductive and harmful. They could be complaining about this is where the leftist comes in. They could be complaining about executive greed or mass layoffs, things that actually hurt game development. Once again, why does this happen? Why are mass layoffs happening? Because people aren't buying your games. But they spend so much effort whining about being forced to play a woman in a game or some character's cleavage not being revealing enough. So once again, it's a bunch of chicken shit arguments along the way. So, and Marty responded, says, I'm serious about being concerned for your soul. I never threaten violence. I'm offering face-to-face civil discourse, and you never experience that. You live in a social media world where there is no actual social consequences to behavior that is rude, crude, ignorant, and disrespectful. For your own sake, leave the stupid podcast and try to make something real that people enjoy before it's too late. And by the way, you know nothing about me. This guy said, did you actually respond to him? He said, I don't need to respond to a straw man. So there's that. That is the state of the video game industry right now. And, the thing about Kind of Funny as a whole is they had a large following very early on. And as of right now, and this is the thing that is most amazing about it, is their channel does worse than ours on a day-to-day basis. We're growing. They've plateaued, and you look at their viewership along the way, and we consistently do better than they do on a day-to-day basis. So on a week-to-week basis, and their brand is old news, and that's the reality of it along the way. Gamers have spoken. Gamers are speaking on a day-to-day basis. So yeah, that's kind of where we're at right now. So yeah, great stuff. Mally, you want to put a pin in that or anything? Do you have anything to close that out?
I feel like my closing thought on it is he immediately felt threatened and said, it was about violence because the man asked to have a civil in-person conversation with him. And as Marty responded and said, you clearly have never had that before because your automatic assumption is just something wild and off to like, you're going to be punched. Well, you might deserve that, but that's not what that was going to be. Or people nowadays don't just need to do that. It's not like you're talking smack about my mama. Like, you just want to have a civil discussion about these things, but you're incapable of doing it because you want to hide behind a screen. So that's my message to you, Andy, if you ever actually have the balls to come on side scrollers.
I very much doubt Andy will come on side scrollers.